Hello and welcome back, and that is right, today we're here to review a new TerraMaster. This is the TerraMaster F4-425 Plus, part of their 2025-2026 generation of NAS devices. Retailing at $569 at launch. This is their new, pretty much mid-range, fully featured prosumer 4-bay. There are more powerful ones with 10 GBE and Intel i5s, but this is designed to compete with things like the Synology DS925 Plus, the QNAP TS464. Ultimately, it's meant to be the jack of all trades. And I would say straight away, as 4-bays go, this is one of the most hardware value rich ones we've seen for a while, at least in a turnkey NAS solution. Now, it rocks out with the N150 4-core Intel processor. That's a 1.0 GHz CPU that can be burst up to 3.6 when it needs to be, with integrated graphics on board. Alongside that, it has 16 gig of DDR5 memory, not ECC, it's that on-die ECC, which isn't really ECC. That can be it could be upgraded via a single slot up to 32 gig. Alongside that, we've got ourselves 4 hard drive bays, but also three, not two, 3 M.2 bays inside. And as if that wasn't enough, it also rocks out with a couple of 5 gig network ports there on the rear, which brings up the standard, I would argue, right now of what this kind of NAS is supposed to be at this price point. As I've mentioned in a previous video, most NAS device brands that provide turnkey NAS solutions, there's this sweet spot in the middle. You get your 2 bays, you get your super budget ARM ones, and then they scale out later to some mental ones. But the middle ground there, generally around 5 to 600 nicker, you get 4 hard drive bays, a couple of M.2s, 2.5 gig, and actually a lot, normally with an Intel processor. This seems to have superseded most of those, and arguably right now seems to be the standard for which many are going to be compared. Now, let's talk about this. Let's start off with design. The design of this, they have tweaked things compared to some of the other TerraMasters that came before it. So if you look at the base of this, we've got 4 rubberized feet there, 4 removable screws to access the internals, more on that later on. We've got a rear mounted controllable fan, a single one, not 2. There on the front, we've got 4 click and load trays, although I will say there is no locking mechanism on these. There's no LCD, and inside, nice and easy, drives go in, sweet as a nut, real easy, if I could see what I'm doing. Compared to other generation TerraMasters, there's really only a couple of big differences here. Number one, front mounted USB connectivity there, long overdue, but metal all the way around. They've actually gone back to a metal external enclosure, which makes a lot of sense when you're thinking about how much storage has been packed inside here. TerraMaster has always been considered the budget end of the market for a lot of users, at least in terms of turnkey, and with so many players coming out of China and Hong Kong right now rolling out OS-free ready-built NAS solutions, and we're starting to see OS-included NAS solutions like the Minisforum N5, the Rico, Cybervault, that sort of thing. There's a lot more competition in the marketplace right now, and they've clearly souped this up. It's not perfect, but I would definitely argue in terms of aesthetic design and dissipation and thermals, it's a lot better. On the subject of thermals though, I will say that when we did run the thermal camera over this device, it was actually pretty darn good. The external enclosure all the way around that metal case in there sat around 25 to 27 degrees. The front panel was around about 24 degrees then. Between each of the individual drives, we could see an internal there of around 27 to 29. And on the rear of the system, where the ports, connections and the fans were, was around 36 to 38. So good thermals there, and that was indicative, by the way, of when we went through the internal temperatures as well, more on that later on. And that was when the system had been up and running for 3 solid days with periodic read-write activity, backups and synchronization as well. Now, with regard to the 3 M.2s inside there, that CPU we mentioned, the M150 CPU we've explored a lot here on the channel, the Intel Twin Lake there, has only got 9 lanes to play with. Nonetheless, they've still managed to really spread things out, so much so that all 3 of the M.2s inside there are Gen 3 times 1. That is around 800 to 900 megabytes per second realistic throughput for each of those M.2 NVMEs inside. Also, you can use them for both caching as well as storage pools. Again, the cap you're going to hit with that CPU, which by the way is a very, very low TDP for that matter as well, is, debatable there. If this arrived with 10 GB on the rear, I'm not saying it wouldn't fully saturate it, but it wouldn't do a great job in terms of surpassing that, or at the very least fully saturating it consistently. But that's a conversation for if they roll out a Pro or a Max version. But when it comes to the ports and connections on the rear, let's talk a little bit about those other connections. The two 5 gig network ports that are on the rear is very unusual. This is the first dual 5 gig NAS that I've talked about on the channel, and I've seen pretty much on the scene. This seems to be the way things are going now that pretty much everyone, you're listening Synology, has scaled up to 2.5 gig. Now, alongside both of those ports, we've got ourselves an HDMI 2.1, which realistically on the Terramaster platform doesn't do a great deal. They don't have a parallel interface, but more on that on multimedia later on. There is 3 more USB ports there on the rear, 2 USB Type A and a USB Type C, and they are 10 gig transfer speeds. So again, plenty of performance as well as lots of accessories from network adapters to UPSs and local peripheral devices supported by those connections. Also, I can confirm that the 5 gig connections are both running on an individual 3x1 lane. So both of them have got more than enough bandwidth afforded to them to reach their maximum network bandwidth potential. So again, we're not going to have too many limits though, although I would argue just how well we're going to be doing saturating both of those if we're using 4 SATA bays. That is a matter for debate. Of course, there's the M.2s, but we've got another video coming up on that soon. I'm looking forward to showing you in the case of that. But what about performance? Before we get on to, and we will discuss power and noise and stuff like that, let's talk about performance. So I had 4 hard drives inside, one of which I've waved at you already. Now, we will be coming back to this later on, by the way, but I went ahead with a slight enterprisey grade hard drive, 7200 RPM Toshiba MG series drives. Now, the reason I did that is I wanted to see, using just hard drives, what could be the maximum performance that I can hope to get to. Would I be able to fully saturate just one of those 5 gig connections with those hard drives? And the answer was yes, I was definitely able to. When I was running AJA, running both a 256 megabyte and a 1 gigabyte test file, it allowed me to fully saturate each of the 5 gig connections there. As well, there is support of things like SMB multi-channel, link aggregation, port trunking, and more. But again, I'm not convinced you'll be able to fully saturate both of those together via a single kind of trunked connection overall. Alongside that, I was running tests with Atto as well, and Atto saw very consistent full saturation of the network connection there in the rear of it. So really, really good numbers so far. Now, after that, I did a Windows transfer test. I transferred 50.5 gigabytes of data, and that was a mixture of over 2,000 mixed files, and I transferred it over that 5 gig connection. The overall transfer took 3 minutes and 45 seconds, which averaged out at 224.4 megabytes per second. That was a consistent transfer, which on hard drives, I'm going to say mechanical spin up, spin down, was pretty good. It was pretty good. It wasn't out of this world, but for what we're getting for the price point and the hardware, it was not too shabby. So what about noise? What about power consumption? Well, let's tackle noise first, because once again, for a metal chassis and having mechanical hard drives, there's going to be some noise levels. Now, you can control the fan, more on that in a moment, but it is worth keeping in mind, and this will be even more important in the power section, that when it comes to using larger hard drives, if they're enterprise grade hard drives or larger than about 8 to 10 TB, they just make more noise. So I kind of had to factor that in. If I was using SATA SSDs or smaller hard drives, then maybe that number would have brought down a few dB, but not a vast amount. But I ran 4 individual operations to get some idea about the noise of this system, just generally. So I had the system running with the fans set to the lowest RPM and the hard drives completely in idle. Now, we did that, and the audio level was sat at around, with a DJI mic and a dB meter, at around 33 dBA. After that, I put the fans up to mid, and from the middle speed there, the middle RPM, and the hard drive still in idle, I saw a dBA rating of around 37. Finally, I put the fans onto their maximum RPM, keeping the hard drives at idle, and we only saw a minimal increase of a few dB up to 38 to 39, with the odd peak into 40 there. Now, after that, I left the fans on their highest RPM, and then after that, started activating and accessing the hard drives and transferring data between those and the M.2s. And we saw the dBA rise, the decibel rating meter sit at around 40 to peaks of 43 dBA. So again, for a metal chassis 4-bay, even with 7200 RPM drives, that was actually not too bad. Let's listen to those now. And now on to power consumption. Now, again, power consumption is going to be very relative, not only to the services that you choose to use on this device, but on top of that, the hard drives and SSDs you choose to use. I was using 7200 RPM drives, and the drives I was using inside here from Toshiba have a peak power consumption of around 8 to 10 watts each when they're being accessed there. Even when they're in idle, they only go down to about 5 watts. The result is that my power consumption numbers on this are going to be relative to me using those drives. And unfortunately, it was noticeable in the power consumption. No, I can't really ever go at TerraMaster for this. It was just to have that set up and hit those speeds. This was that power consumption. But to give you a sense of relativity, the first thing I did was set up the device with 3 M.2s inside, which are barely drawing a watt each, and set the device up with no hard drives connected. So the system's in idle, no power drawing drives. It went to just 13.3 watts. Again, that CPU inside barely hits 7 or 8 watts in idle, thanks to that low TDP. So 13.3 watts for the system with no hard drives inside, but 3 M.2s. And 2 5-gig connections was pretty respectable. Then when I went with the hard drives inside, I kept the hard drives in idle, but the full TOS utilization with both 5-gig connections, then the power up to 55 watts. Again, keep in mind, those drives are drawing around 5, potentially 6 watts each. You have to slice off about 24 watts or so for relativity's sake. When I had the hard drives being accessed, but only one 5-gig connection, that power consumption was relatively similar, around 54 to 56 watts. Finally, when I had both the hard drives being accessed and the SSDs being accessed, and the CPU at around 80% utilization, I saw my highest rating there of around 61 to 63 watts. Again, not terrible once you factor in the drives I was using, and if you're using non-enterprise class drives or SSDs, you could have definitely sliced off something between 15 to 25 watts easily. Next up, let's talk software. Before we sink our teeth into TOS, the operating system, it's worth highlighting that TerraMaster, alongside a few other turnkey NAS brands, not only arrived with a system that has turnkey NAS software alongside the hardware, but they do allow you to use third-party operating systems like Unraid, like TrueNAS, OpenMedia Vault, and more. A lot of users buy TerraMaster NAS devices to run third-party operating systems because they don't want to get the old silicon paste under the fingernails in order to build their system from scratch, and they want to take advantage of the compact design of turnkey NAS solutions like this. However, when you pay your $569 at launch for this, you are paying for that software. So let's take the time to look into what that software is like and whether it deserves your money and your data. And here we are on the desktop of my Windows machine accessing the F4-425 Plus. Real quick, this picture of a sad kitten in the background that is the default genuinely always bums me out, so I'm going to immediately change it. We're just going to change that to the world, and let's carry on. So I've already covered TOS before in several different videos, so I am going to kind of skip over it a little bit quickly. I will say right now I'm looking at this on 100% zoom, as you can see there. I'm not a big fan of the bar there at the top. There's a little bit of customization, but not a vast amount. On the right hand side of the screen, you can open up the dashboard that will give you real-time information about the hardware resources, what the system's doing, what it's not doing, and you can kind of play around with a lot of these widgets that you want to have there on screen. It's a neat little feature, and again, you can really open it up and go directly into the control panel if you wish. So real quick, when it comes to storage being managed on this, going back into that control panel there, I've got the system running there with the 4 hard drives that we talked about inside, enterprise grade hard drives inside, sorry about the noise. Alongside that, I've got multiple SSDs inside there. Indeed, as you can see, I've got 2 SSDs in operation, one being used for caching, one being used for general storage. And for those of you that have used other NAS brands, there really is going to be a different perception of this page. If you're used to things like DSM, this is going to seem graphically probably a little bit inconsistent there, and that is a word that I would use in TOS, unfortunately. It does a lot of the things that modern NAS devices are designed to do, but I do think the presentation does come across a weird mix of graphical, a weird mix of modern, and weirdly dated and textual all at the same time. But creating areas of storage, so for example, I've got these two SSDs inside here. If I wish, I can turn those into a lovely little RAID configuration if I choose to. And if I go through the options there, for example, if I only want to use one of those SSDs, I can create a single pool, or it'll give me some idea with multiple drives, taking advantage of that T-RAID flexible configuration and more. And again, if I had more drives, all the way up to RAID 5. But if I go for a single disk there and go ahead and create our storage area, we're now creating another storage pool that can be utilized with another one of those M.2 SSDs. And at the same time as that, while it's building that inside there, we can still use other features and services of the system. So for example, if you want to use caching there, if I wanted to go ahead and add one of those other SSDs to cache the hard drive storage pool, I can do that. I can use that for read and write caching and then assign that for caching. And having 3 individual M.2 bays really does open up the flexibility of what I want to use for caching, what I want to use for storage pools, and more. So it's, you know, quite nice to have. The idea that you could actually technically create a RAID 5 of SSDs alongside your RAID 5 of hard drives is pretty unique at this price point. Alongside that, the range of storage options that range all the way from those storage pools and volumes that we've seen just now, all the way through to support of things like iSCSI are all available here on the TOS 6 platform. Again, we'll be doing a much deeper TOS 6 video in line with these new releases, but pretty much everything you're going to need is there. If we go into the apps and services, for example, we can bolt on cloud services if we choose to. So whether it is that you're migrating away from cloud for the first time or migrating away from other platforms onto this, you can bridge those connections that you may have with, you know, a variety of different cloud platforms and bolt them onto your storage system. It is really only, it doesn't fully mount them for the apps and services. That's something we've really only seen QNAP do, but they are getting close to it. Likewise, for those users that are running multi-site backup operations, multi-platform backup operations, you can use the BBS backup tool here to, you know, connect all of those platforms, get that true 3-2-1 backup strategy, or again 3-3-2-2-1-0, whatever it calls itself these days. I swear it changes every year. But from there, you can, you know, connect with multiple platforms back and forth, from client service backup operations in Apple Time Machine, centralized backups from within your system. You can run backups from individual servers in your local area network on a file folder level, or your virtual machine kind of backup operations on those PAAS and SaaS services for virtualization. It's kind of impressive how much they've evolved this platform. And again, the presentation is not as consistent as some of the other market players out there, but I've got to give them credit. They're covering the bases. Simple stuff like snapshots. If you want to create file system snapshots or just folder level snapshots by going into there and going into our shared folders and actioning the snapshot protocols there, creating a schedule, you can do that. Or make your way through to synchronization with local client services, local Linux servers. It's all built in there for you to take advantage of as and when you need it. And again, with cloud synchronization, local USB backups, or internal system folder to folder backups, it's all rolled in here with that software. I'm not going to say they're going to be challenging Synology Active Backup soon, but I'm going to say they're making a go of it. Simple stuff, like if you do want to create a new shared area of storage, let's call this test share, and I want to put that on top of our SSD area of storage there, and I call this one secure, what I can do is go ahead with the next option and enable encryption if I choose to. Better yet, if you're worried about ransomware, we've got a couple of things to talk about. Number one, when you do create a volume area on the system, such as one we're going to create now on that pool we created. So if I go ahead and create this one and call it secure vol, from there I can go ahead and then enable write once, read many. So for those unaware, write once, read many means that if I choose to, I can have data going into this repository that either can never be adapted for a certain period of time by anyone or just by an administrator. And again, that locks that out. It allows you to effectively create a an area of storage that things like ransomware will try to do something about and simply can't. And moreover from that, and we talked about this before, because these were one of the brands that were targeted by a large-scale ransomware attack a few years ago, one of the things they integrated, and one of the areas of this system that I really, really like, is that isolation mode that I've talked about before, where in isolation mode, you can completely sever the system and disconnect all third-party PHP. It disables all non-administrator access. It completely severs the system from outside access and requires a reboot. And that can be triggered at any moment if you choose. As mentioned, I'm going to have to go into a completely separate video if I'm going to talk about individual apps and services. But ultimately, everything you're going to need is here. Deduplication built into the system there, Docker, virtual machine utilization, everything and Jellyfin natively put inside the system. Well, we've already done some Jellyfin testing on this. DLNA and UPnP media server support there. These are all the default applications with a community app center with more apps to go as well. Their own surveillance application, running everything that you need to get this up and running, and client applications directly downloadable from TOS for you to transfer and run from your own devices. Terra synchronization to synchronize those multiple platforms, USB copy, and an AI photo recognition area that allows us, when we upload bulk photos and images and more, as you can see here that I've uploaded onto the system, we can make our way with person and photo recognition to identify people here like me, give it a name, and then you can reference and find these people by their names. The AI photo recognition is still not quite as advanced as I've seen from some of the newer players, where they've got a lot more object and individual AI plugins, but it's still not terrible, and the identification of objects is a lot better than it's been for a very long time. And a lot of this could be set for sharing and easy filtering here on the right hand side of the screen, that we use a lot of the metadata built into these photos to allow you to filter them, create individual files and folders that are unique to your own setup and sharing. It's all pretty detailed that it crawls that metadata easily. TOS does feel responsive, and it's better than it's ever been. It's not perfect by any regard, and it's still a ways behind things like Synology's DSM platform in terms of fluidity and ease of use, but I would argue it is significantly better than most of the other players out there that are trying to challenge the likes of Synology and QNAP. And if you're moving away from Unraid or TrueNAS and don't want complexity, you're going to love this. Everything is kind of intuitively where it needs to be. It is really just a polish where it lacks, and sometimes when I'm running some of these applications or trying to figure out where certain apps and services are, they're not quite in the right spot, and that's where I think user experience could stand to be improved upon. Likewise, if I look at things like the resource monitor, they are pretty good. They're not terrible, but I'm not going to say they're presented in a very modern fashion. They just feel a little dated in the way they're being shown off, but not necessarily bad. Just not quite finding the line there between usability in a modern software platform and the more technically geared setup for a network service appliance. I look forward to showing you more about TOS in the follow-up video to this, where we're going to dig into the fully fledged release of TOS 6. But ultimately right now, whether it is you're looking at the F4-425 Plus for the native software that it includes, or you're looking at it to install a third-party offering software, at this price point, I like what we've got here, and the apps and services that are made available to you are, further ahead than players like Ugreen, like Acer Store. They are way ahead of the curve on that. So if you're looking for something in the middle of the top players and the new players, this is a great start. Overall, for what you are getting for your money, and as long as you remember you're looking at a turnkey NAS solution and some of that money has to go towards software development in client tools and desktop tools, this is a very attractive proposition. And as we go into this range, this tier of the NAS portfolio, seeing releases from all of the common NAS players, we look at what this provides with its dual 5 gigs, its N15 CPU, the 16 gig of memory, 3 M.2s and 4 hard drive bays in a turnkey form, and you've got to appreciate what is here. Is it perfect? No. It is still not, at least in terms of software, bothering the likes of Synology and QNAP at this time. But I would argue with a lot of, as mentioned earlier, Chinese and Hong Kong-based NAS solutions arriving in the market, TerraMaster needs to stretch its muscles a little bit and show why it's been around and what it has learnt while being around. Now, there are alternatives in the market at this price point that we need to discuss. The Minisforum N5 is a great example and one that we talked about before. Arriving right now, the non-pro version, at around about a similar price tag to this, although with software that is nowhere near as evolved or indeed as established as TOS. Likewise, we can look at things like the Ugreen solutions, and we can look at Synology's recent offerings, but again, they leverage more software than hardware. Bottom line, the F4-425 Plus is probably one of the best TerraMaster NAS devices I've used, but where it sits in the general, focus right now in the market is still up for debate as other brands slowly roll out their solutions and they compare their product with either evolved and new players in the market versus established but slower players that are still yet to bring out an alternative to this. So stay tuned to find out what exactly other players are going to do now we're starting to see solutions like this roll out. But let me know what you guys think. There's a written review link below. I recommend you check that out, of course. But if you found this video helpful and if you want to support what we do, hands down, the best way you can do it is if you found it helpful and you're going to buy this device, to use the links in the description. Using those links results in a small commission coming to me and Eddie here at NASCompares, and allows us to keep doing what we do. It costs you nothing extra. You lose nothing by it, and you support creators like us and others out there. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.